My name is Jim Green. I'm on the Grantwood AEA Board of Directors, and I represent the AEAs on the IASB Board of Directors. I'm very pleased to introduce our featured speaker for this second general session. Chris Lehmann is the founding principal of the Innovative Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. It is an inquiry-driven, project-based school considered to be one of the pioneers in the School 2.0 movement. He was recently named one of 3 winners of the prestigious 2014 Harold W. McGraw Jr. Prize in Education. We are truly fortunate to have Chris here today to share his experience and his insight into how school leaders like yourselves can ensure our Iowa students experience relevant, rigorous, and meaningful learning in every classroom, every day. Please help me welcome Chris Lehmann.
There we go. Hi, good afternoon. So, why am I here, right? Why did I leave snowy or cold Philadelphia for cold Des Moines? I'm really passionate about these ideas, and what I want to talk about today is this idea of the modern school, School 2.0. Why I do this, why I travel around and talk about all this stuff when really what I love more than anything else is just being in my school, is there's sort of 3 reasons. The first are my own children. That up in the upper right-hand corner, that's Jacob and Theo on the first day of school this year. Jacob is in 5th grade, Theo is in 2nd, and I want better schools for them. I want their schools to be amazing and awesome and inspiring and all of the things that Will talked about in his keynote this morning. And I will tell you that Jacob, when he went to school, he was a reader. Both my wife and I are overeducated English majors. There's not a room in our house that does not have a bookshelf in it. And Jacob went to school having been read to every day of his life and thinking that reading was this wonderful thing. And then he went to kindergarten. And he experienced the basal readers, I guess, and the way that we teach reading in kindergarten. And he stopped wanting to learn. And it wasn't the fault of the teachers. His kindergarten teacher was a kind, caring, wonderful person, but she was giving him books that, went something like this. Johnny went to the store. Johnny went to the park. Johnny killed himself from boredom. And you understand it, right? I mean, I get it, but nowhere in his class and nowhere in anything that he was doing in school was there joy and passion and story and narrative and interest and all of the rest of it. And it really set us back. And interestingly, we got him back into reading, and he now is just, he actually, he gets in trouble almost every single day because he has the books that he smuggles into school collected from him because he reads during class time. And we get note after note after note, please stop sending Jacob to school with books. I'm going to let that one marinate for a sec. And imagine my wife and I, both of whom, and again, full disclosure, I was the kid who got in trouble for reading in class all throughout my K-12 career. I would put the textbook in front of me and then have my book behind the textbook and be reading. And imagine, my wife and I having to sit there and say, now, Jacob, there's no reading in school. So fine. Theo has an IEP. He has a syndrome you've never heard of, and lucky you. And for him, school is a massive challenge. Now, he is bright and creative and interesting and also an amazing reader. I don't think the day will come where he ever passes. I don't think there's a math test you could invent that he can pass. And I worry deeply that every teacher who has Theo in class will look at him and think, I've got to get this kid to pass the test? And I want school to be better than that. I want his teachers to look at him, and we're very lucky, he's had some wonderful teachers, but I want them to look at him and say, oh my God, this brilliant, creative, wonderful kid. How can I maximize his strengths and help him to mitigate his weaknesses? And that's what I think, school can do. The other reason I think this is really important is that I'm lucky. I get to travel all over the place and talk to teachers. And they are profoundly uncomfortable right now. And I think it's great to get to talk to you all because you're at the next level, and I think that's really important. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I ask teachers, and I'm curious how this audience will respond. How many of you think you're getting it 100% right for the kids that are in your charge, that are in your district? Not a hand. 90%. Still not a hand. 80%. Still not a hand. How many of you think you're getting it half right? Maybe we're at half the room. Teachers say the same thing, by the way. You guys have the same sense of what's going on in your classrooms as the teachers do. When I ask this question in Canada, they all raise their hands and think they're getting it great. So clearly interestingly. But yeah, the adults know something's wrong. They just don't know how to fix it. And, teachers didn't get into this job to hurt children. There are some really bad teachers, and let's admit that, and that's fine. But the overwhelming majority of teachers, the vast majority of teachers, don't wake up in the morning and think, I get to hurt the children today. And they know they're not doing right. That's hard. That's painful. And then the third, and of course, really most powerful thing is the kids themselves, the kids we teach. So if we can have my slide, right. So down at that bottom, that was September 2006. That was at our ribbon cutting day for Science Leadership Academy when we opened up our first school. If you ever want to be profoundly humbled, start a school. 125 families sent us their children when we were little more than an idea and a construction site. I said to them at graduation 4 years later, I said to them all, I can ask you now, what were you thinking? But the thing is this, and again, so full disclosure here. Parents send us the best of what they have every day, right? I mean, there is not, again, the overwhelming majority of parents love their children deeply and want nothing but the best for them. And we can argue about what the best looks like and yada, 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 and that's the devil is always in the details. But parents send us the best of what they have every day, the best thing they've ever done, their children, every day. That is a level of trust that, short of brain surgery, I don't know how many other professions have that kind of trust. And so now, again, you are all decision makers in your district. Admit this. How many of you have had a moment, how many of you are parents, first off, overwhelming majority. How many of you have had that moment where when your children were in school, maybe they still are, I don't know, and there was that moment of separation, whether it was at the bus stop, whether it was at the schoolhouse door, and you saw your child walk away from you, and you thought, please don't screw them up too badly today. Show of hands, admit it, who will be honest? Okay, I think that almost every day. So that's, some of the background for this stuff. Now I'm going to cop to 3 biases. Anybody know who that is? Shout it out if you know. I heard somebody say it. Shout it loud. Dewey. That is correct. That is John Dewey. Raise your hand if you have read John Dewey. Okay. You all have a homework assignment. School and Society, the Child and Curriculum. Read it. I really think that some of the answer to what ails us today is based on some of the best ideas in education we've ever had. John Dewey was brilliant. He was amazing. He had kids doing real-world stuff at the Chicago Lab School, where 100 years later our president would send his own children, in doing unbelievable work. You know how they learned about science and chemistry? Food science. He had the kids make the lunches for their classmates. You want to talk about a high-stakes assessment? And for years and years and years, the knock on this stuff, the knock on Dewey's ideas, was that it takes too long and it looks like crap. Right? My mom, I will cop to this, I am the child of a union lawyer and a school teacher. All of the ideas that you're going to hear from me are profoundly derivative, and my parents really like it when I say that. But in 1976, in Camden, New Jersey, where my mom both grew up and taught, which is a very challenging place to do both of those things, she got a grant to do a summer project with middle school kids with the old, what I must imagine must have been the old Super 8 cameras, to have these kids tell the stories of their lives and create documentary films of their lives in Camden. No one had ever asked these children to do that again, to do that at that point. If she did it today, she'd be an Apple Distinguished Educator. They'd be flying her all over the country. They'd call it digital storytelling. David Jakes would have written a story about it, and she would be doing great. Back then, the problem was it took forever. It took the whole summer. And what it looked like was like those old home movies when you had to cut the film and melt it back together, and it looked really kind of mediocre. And it was very, very, very easy to dismiss the kind of real work that kids could do. But today, with this, and with that laptop that is sitting over there, kids can make things that are as powerful, as real, as publishable as much of the stuff that we see on network television today. Look at, again, super awesome Sylvia's YouTube videos, but also look at the whole YouTube phenomena. Your students are listening to artists and watching short films and watching filmmakers and musicians and do all of this stuff that you've never heard of because they've all bypassed the traditional distribution methods. And they're doing it with the laptops that they have in their homes. I really believe that the secret to some of this stuff is these best ideas that we've had with the tools that finally will enable us to get there. I also believe this. Anyone who says that the purpose of education is to create the 21st century workforce is doing a disservice to children. Our job is more noble and more important, and also more important for our society than that. If we shoot for workforce, that's all we'll ever get. Our job is to help kids become the fully realized citizens of the world that we so desperately need them to be. That's how we will get the scholars, the parents, the voters, the activists that we so desperately need. We are handing these kids problems that we cannot solve. Global climate change will fundamentally change the way they live their lives. Our economy, no one knows what the next 20 years of the American economy, let alone the global economy, will look like. And if we train them for a workforce that we have today, they will not develop the skills that they need to be the citizens of both today and tomorrow. And my third bias is this. I believe deeply that the American democratic experiment will fail without a robust public educational system. Public education is the hallmark. Thank you. Without public education, there is no American democracy. It is, as Scott McLeod and I were chatting about earlier, the notion of the common school, the place that we come together, is as needed now, perhaps more so than it ever was. So what's the problem? The problem is school, for lack of a better word, kind of stinks. This is Jacob at the end of a day of school. Right? They had him for 7 hours of 4 minutes. And they've got him doing worksheets. And this is a couple years old, this picture now. I think it's 2 years old. But, there was nothing of interest that they were asking him to do. And all over this country, kids are doing work that they don't know why. Right? School is about compliance for too many kids. We tell them to do what they're told over and over and over again. And what we teach them is stuff they might never need or care about. And to prove this point, I took this slide from the state practice tests in Pennsylvania for mathematics. How many of you have had to do a box and whisker plot in the last year of your life? One person raises her hand. She's like, I am a statistician. Ha ha! And actually, here's the funny thing about that. I actually think in a citizenship-driven education, by the way, if we were to truly, that notion of workforce versus citizenship is not just a kind of semantic argument. If we were to teach a citizenship-driven education, calculus would not be the path that we put all math kids on. It would be statistics. Because very few of you have had to do a derivative in the last few years. But every single one of you, I guarantee you, has probably, when you read an article about a political election or saw a piece on CNN or in any of the news channels you watch, probably thought, I wonder how they got to that polling number. but didn't know how to ask the next question because we don't teach kids real-world math. If we did, we would make sure that every single child graduated with a fundamental understanding of how people do statistical analysis, because if you don't have that, you're more easily lied to. And we don't want children to be lied to. This question, why do I need to know this, is oftentimes the province of the smart aleck. That kid in class, why do I need to know this? If we were to create a student's Bill of Rights, the right to ask that question would be almost first on the list, past like the right to a safe place to learn. Children should demand of us this question. And better yet, they shouldn't even have to ask it, because we should be having schools that are so profoundly relevant and powerful to their lives that the answer to this question is obvious. Instead, what we do is we give them this, right? You're going to need it someday. It'll be on the test. It looks good in a resume. It'll help you get a job, yada, yada, yada. When really the answer is probably down at the bottom. Somebody told me once upon a time I had to learn it, or worse yet, somebody told me this is what I had to teach you. And I chose this image from from Flickr Creative Commons for a reason. He's not a bad guy, right? But he's in a system that doesn't help him do amazing things with the kids. And behind all of this, and this gets to some of what Will was talking about, is this fundamental question. Is school still relevant? And the harder part about that question, and this is something that I think as all of you go back and think about how you work with your teachers, is this. Behind that question for teachers is the even harder question. Am I still relevant? And here's the thing that you have to understand about teachers. We are a weird lot in that teachers identify what they do with who they are in ways that is not common in most professions. My wife is a communications person. She was she does public relations for one of the universities in Philadelphia. And when you first meet Kat, and you say like, oh, tell me about yourself, she doesn't say, I am a publicist. You ask a teacher, oh, tell me about yourself. That's what you will get. I am a teacher. So when we talk about school change and whether or not the schools we have are still relevant places, you have to understand that you are fundamentally hurting people at their core. People who know they're not doing as well as they should be, but don't have an answer. And as we ask that question, the problem is this. Schools were built on the industrial design, right? It's the factory model of education, right? It's the assembly line. Does anybody else know, I'm just curious, any of the other factors that actually go into the physical design of schools? What other institutions in our world actually influence school design, especially old school design? Anybody know? Prisons, right? Think about it. We move the children from cell to cell to cell to cell. And the proof that it's prisons as the design is this. You know what they teach all new principals? The first thing that you got to do if you want to make sure that you have a good school? Anybody know? Discipline, but specifically, there is 35% of the real estate of almost every school in America is in use less than 5% of the day. Anybody know what part that is? The halls. That's exactly right, the halls. And you are taught as a principal, for the love of God, keep the hallways clear. If you have children in the hallways, chaos will reign. Oh my God! I say free the hallways. Every inch of the school building should be a learning space. Every space you have should be social. Every space you have should be active and powerful. If you're doing project-based learning, and I don't care if your classroom, if you've got a 1,500 square foot classroom, if you've got 30 kids in that class all doing active stuff, that place gets loud quick. Open the doors, let them work in the halls. Throw some tables and chairs out there and let every space, make sure that when you walk into the building, even the hallways themselves feel vibrant, feel filled with the amazing energy and passion and joy of learning that kids bring to school every day that we spend way too much time crushing out of them. So as we think about redesigning our schools, there's a whole lot of people in this world right now who will tell you that it's the market economy of schools. And there are plenty of folks out there who will say, you want to reform schools? Just make them more like business. Don't do that. please. Schools are not businesses. They belong to the best democratic ideals we have. It's not this, it's a lot more like this. Right, that's SLA, and I love this story, by the way. This is just a quick, this picture was a senior day. These are all seniors in the hallways, and we don't really have senior pranks at our school because like the kids came, they were like, and so this is how you know SLA is kind of a weird place. They came to me and said, is it okay if we do a senior prank? We wouldn't want to upset anybody. Well, so they came with, and they had this idea, and they actually came and they were like, we want to do a sleep-in, where we all come out, you know, and we spend the day and we just bring our sleeping bags and all the rest of it. And I was like, sure, you know, you're seniors, like that's second semester, rock on. And so they planned it all out, and the day that they had it planned for was a day that a potential funder was coming to the school to give us a grant. And so I said to a couple of the kids, and I realized that, and I was like, oh God, this is bad. They're gonna see like 120 kids all asleep in the halls, and that's maybe not the best way to raise money. And so I went to a couple of the seniors and I said, we have a problem. And they went, got it, we're on it. So they were like, what time's the tour? And I was like, 10 o'clock. They said, what time's it over? I said, probably 10:30. I said, great. So 8:15, all the seniors are in the halls, sleeping bags, pajamas, the whole 9 yards. 9:55 hits, whoom, all go to class, all pretend they're working. They weren't really, they're second semester seniors. And then the second 10:30 hit, poof, all back in the halls, right? That's a democratically run, that's a democratic place. And so I think what we need as we think about school redesign and we think about reimagining what schools can be, we need this notion of the modern school. So what is the modern school? Number one, and I think, you know, Will talked about this with that wonderful Saracen quote that he used, schools should teach us how to learn. First and foremost, schools should teach us not only how to learn, but to love learning and to have a truly, to live a life of the mind. And if they do that, schools can help us learn how to live. Right? This project is one that I really love. This is Senorita Manuel's Spanish 4 class project, and this is a project on identity. So as the kids were learning about the roles that masks play in Latino-Hispanic culture, they were also writing essays about who they were and what was visible about them and what was invisible about them. And they were also designing masks that were graphic representations of how they saw themselves. And then they had to use the essays themselves to design, as part of the design of the mask. So what you see here is an essay that a child wrote about what was visible about who they are. And if I had cool 360 technology, I would turn this, and you would see on the back of it everything that was invisible about that child. Now, I think that's hard to do in English. Imagine having that kind of reflective work in a language that you are still learning, right? Schools can help us learn how to live. The paradox, of course, is that we live in really strange days. This is Sam. And in this photo, what Sam is doing is he's using a document camera to take pictures of an earthworm dissection. And he is capturing those images on his laptop, which he will then use a program like Sketch or something like that to annotate. And he will then take that and put it into a lab report, which he will publish on his school blog. And it will look as profound and as polished as anything that you would see in a textbook. Now, I hated high school biology because I'm a horrible artist. And every lab report that I did looked like an amoeba dissection. And he doesn't have that. He is able to do real work, real scientific work, and make it look unbelievable. And the sad thing is, no one will care unless there happens to be a question on earthworms on the state test. So we're in a strange moment where, how many people have used this phrase or heard this phrase, data-driven decision-making? Just out of curiosity, has this hit the school boards? A couple folks, okay? Your teachers hear it all the time, I guarantee you. And I believe in data. I'm a numbers cruncher, even though I was an English major. But I believe in good data. And I believe that the data that we are measuring children by is the least good data we've got. It's the standardized test. We need to work harder. We need to encourage, and you all are in a position to do this. It is time to push back. It is time to say, yes, we want to measure the work that is going on in our schools. And yes, we need to make sure that schools are doing the work that they say they are doing. But we need to look at the work. We need to create systems of inter-rater reliability. We need to create systems that allow teachers to talk across one school, across districts, that measure the work that the kids do each and every day in their classes. I don't care how they score on a standardized test. I care about what they think. I care about what they write. I care about what they do. I care about what they create. And we need to work harder to demand better, to say that is the work that must be valued in policy work. And you all are in a position to make that change. I think part of the way we do this is we reclaim our language, right? There is a phrase that is in the education world. Again, how many people have heard the phrase deliver instruction? Okay, your teachers hear it all the time. I don't know what it means. I honestly don't. Again, this is where I really am the English major. I don't know how you deliver instruction, as it is as if instruction was this thing that we could package and hand. Here, I've brought the instruction for you. Thank you so much for coming today. But here's the funny thing. If you can deliver instruction, you can buy it and you can sell it. And there's a whole lot of folks ready to do it. What happens in our school is teaching and learning. It has nothing to do with delivery. We need to rechange our language. We also have to understand, now I'm a geek. I'm a huge geek. I love technology. I think technology is revolutionizing the way that we think about our schools. But in too many places, I see technology being used for this. If the best thing that we can imagine that these unbelievably powerful tools can do is the evolutionary film strip and Scantron, shame on us. Our failure will be great and terrible. This is not personalized learning, right? Personalized learning is not, let's all go through the content online at a slightly different pace. It is rather, instead, we all have to have skin in the game. It's gotta matter. And that's the schools we gotta create. So how are we gonna, and I love that it's John Cleese who said this, right? How do you do it? If you want creative workers, give them enough time to play. Right? And this was back when Edutopia still was a magazine, he said this. And the proof of that is this. This picture comes from the MIT Media Lab. Has anyone ever been there? Anybody heard of it? Okay, some folks. It is amazing. If you ever get the chance to go. It is where I'm convinced that if I die and come back 10 times smarter than I am, that's where I want to live my life. And the amazing thing is I got to spend a week there. Smartest people in the world, smartest people I've ever been around. And the way these unbelievably smart people think is, if you can look in the sort of middle right-hand corner, the motto of the MIT Media Lab is lifelong kindergarten. And not the kindergarten that Jacob and Theo got, and I'm really upset about that. They have a sense of awe and wonder and play, and they build stuff that's gonna change the world. Shouldn't all of our schools be like that? Right? And again, the other point to prove this is, and I hate people read off their slides, I'm gonna do it very quickly, is the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Alvin Toffler said that. Proof of that is that this picture, which you see behind the slide, came from the Slide Rule Museum. How many people in this room will cop to being old enough to having learned math from a slide rule? Right? All right. When was the last time you used one? Like, time to do the monthly bills. Shh. No. Not happening. Now, I have a vision in my head of the last teacher who used the slide rule, right? She's a little old lady. She believed that Texas Instruments was the work of the devil. And you were gonna pry that slide rule from her cold, dead hands. And they probably did. And I also have no doubt that she was an amazing slide rule math teacher. But what she did not recognize is that she was doing what was good for her. And she didn't recognize that it was no longer good for the kids. So my challenge to all of you, when you go back to your schools, when you go back to your districts, is what are you as a district willing to unlearn? And I will make fun of myself here. So can anybody recognize the code that's on the screen? Yeah. HTML. Okay, it's 1996. I am a young teacher in New York City. I have 150 kids on my roster, and I am trying to do authentic reader-writer interaction and writing workshops with 150 rough drafts to grade, and I am drowning. And I think to myself, wait a minute, I have friends. They can help my ninth graders with their essays. And we started something called the Cyber Mentoring Project, where I paired up students with friends of mine, and they would email each other their work, and the kids would write their papers as web pages, coding the HTML on a Linux box, hard code into it, and then having email dialogue using Pine. How many people remember Pine? To make their writing better, and it was awesome. It was great. It was cool. I got featured on the Today Show. I was going to conferences. I was that hip young teacher who wore all black and would talk about this stuff. It was cool. I've modernized. I now wear, white check. Will still wears all black. But in any event, doing that was great, and it made me feel really cool. And having every single kid hard code their HTML became irrelevant or unnecessary the day that Microsoft Office came out with the upgrade that said save as web page. And for 2 more years, I had every single kid hard coding their essays in HTML because it was what differentiated me. But it was not what the kids needed. And I had to unlearn that. And I think all over this country, we have teachers desperately needing to unlearn the practices they have so that they have modern practices for kids. So how are we going to get there? We got to tell a better story. We've got to have vision. Right? Again, this is another picture I took off of Flickr. The caption under this was, "Look at my shiny new classroom." Well, the legs of the desks are blue. I bet you that was new in the catalog that year. David Warlick tells the story better than I do. He talks about the fact that if Rip Van Winkle were to wake up today, he would be bewildered by all he saw around him until he walked into a school. At which point he would go, well, the blackboards are white now, but everything else seems pretty much the same. We've got to have a better story. And again, this is the interesting thing. All of you, and it's funny because I've talked to a lot of people today already, and you've talked about the pushback you get. How do you get people to buy into this change? How do you get parents to buy into this change? Parents are desperate for the new narrative, just like the kids are and just like the teachers are. It's got to be about the story we tell. So the first thing we have to do is we have to build caring institutions. I challenge all of you to take this back to your districts. If you take nothing else from this conference, change this. Change the way the teachers talk about what they do. Teachers aren't math teachers. They don't teach math. They don't teach science. They don't teach 3rd grade. They teach kids math. They teach kids science. They teach 3rd graders. Change the way we talk. Put the kids at the front and center of everything we do. Children should never be the implied object of their own education. We have to build caring institutions where we understand that no fact or figure that we may teach is as important as the children we teach. And everything I'm going to talk about now for the rest of this talk, there are systems and structures that you can build to make them substantiated and sustainable in your schools. The next thing is I believe schools need to be inquiry-driven. It's about asking questions that we don't know the answer to, right? Asking a question, so like what does that look like? So for example, in our 10th grade biochemistry classes, our kids are going out and they're doing soil and water samples all over the city of Philadelphia, taking and then using probeware to analyze the pollution levels that they are finding. And then they are taking that data and they are graphing it onto a Google map and overlaying things like socioeconomics and race. And asking really powerful questions. Why do we seem to see levels of pollution in different neighborhoods? That's a question the teacher can't answer. But it's a powerful question to ask. We need to ask questions we don't know the answer to. We need to understand that it's got to be about the kids. It's got to be student-centered. This is fine for right now because I got you for 45 minutes. But if I had you for 180 days, you would never hear me talk this much all at once ever. It's got to be about what the kids can do. Now, that being said, it's about teacher mentorship. Here's the beautiful paradox. Teachers can be the adults kids need them to be when they get away from the front of the room. We spend more time with the kids when we make it about the kids than we do when we stand in the front of the room. Because kids need adults. Those folks who are out there right now who are saying like the rocket ship model out in California, let's put the kids online all day long and have them and they can all pass the test that way and therefore we can hire fewer teachers and therefore we can save money. Anyone who, and those people are dangerous and scary and wrong. And anyone who would say that these amazing tools that we have are an excuse to spend less money on teachers, you're doing harm to children. Don't do that. We need to put caring adults in front of the kids and give them the tools that they need to really be those adults. We also have to understand that we can learn from many. Schools can be community-based now. Ask yourself, most school boards, just out of curiosity, how many of you for your school board meetings, either through the local cable access or through the internet, televise or broadcast your school board meetings? Wow, not as many as I thought. Interesting. That's common practice in Pennsylvania these days. Ask ourselves, why wouldn't we do that in our schools? Why wouldn't we have, and maybe not every day, because kids need safe spaces to learn away from the eyes of adults, because they're not adults. But why wouldn't we, from time to time, Skype people in? Why wouldn't we do Google Hangouts? Why wouldn't we broadcast what's going on in our classrooms? We can make the walls of our schools permeable membranes that the kids go in and out of. The teacher does not have to be the expert anymore. Will talked about that brilliantly this morning. We also have to understand that collaboration works, right? My ideas should interact with your ideas and be changed by that. Synthesis is the way we learn. Our ideas need to collide with one another, and we need to have great discussions and debates in our schools. And that can happen online, that can happen off, that can happen in physical space, that can happen asynchronously. But there are very few places left in our world where the only thing that matters is what you do all by yourself. It doesn't happen in our marriages. It doesn't happen in our workforce. It doesn't happen in our society. In school, in the rest of the world, we call it collaboration. We call it teamwork. In school, we call it cheating. We should change that. I also, not shockingly, believe that schools should be places of great passion. And I'm not talking about what happens in the hallways in between classes. One of the things that we say about at SLA is, what if high school was not preparation for real life? What if high school was real life? What if we dared kids to do real work right now? I'm going to tell the story of this picture. This is a picture from a senior capstone presentation. We had a young woman graduate 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. Wow, time flies. And I have her permission to tell this story, by the way, and it is one of my favorite stories of SLA. She came to us, she came to Philadelphia in middle school from Liberia. Anybody know what the national language of Liberia is? Shout it out. English, that is correct. However, some teacher in some middle school in Philadelphia saw a quiet African child and labeled her Esau. And in a comedy of errors, or a tragedy of errors perhaps, that was worthy of Joseph Heller, she couldn't get unlabeled Esau because she didn't speak any language other than English. And the funny thing about that, and the interesting thing about that, is so she just kind of shut up. Her voice wasn't valued, her experience wasn't valued, and so she stopped talking. And she came to us pretty much selectively mute. Now, the thing about voice is this, which is that if it doesn't come out in good ways, it's going to come out in bad. She also became a cutter, self-harm. And at SLA, she rediscovered her voice. At SLA, she found a caring community where she could talk about that. And she would stand in her advisory, and her advisory, advisory is this 4-year thing that we have, which is where we care about children, sort of the place in which we schedule care for children. She would stand in front of her colleagues and say, I haven't cut in a week, I haven't cut in a month, or I backslid last night and I cut. And no matter what her answer was, her community was there for her. And she learned over time how to integrate this American kid that she was with her Liberian background. And so her senior capstone, which is a year-long inquiry project where you got to do something cool, was she created LIB, Liberian Inspired Beauty. It was a fashion company, and she designed 6 original dresses. Now, the interesting thing is we found her a mentor, someone who was always on the other end of a Skype call or an email, a fashion designer in New York City that somebody knew. And that fashion designer said to her, remember, we can learn from many? It's important that you make 3 of these dresses, but I'm also going to make you work with a seamstress who I know who will make these dresses for you, because it is not enough for you to be able to design them and do it yourself. If you're going to do this in this world and in this life, you've got to be able to communicate your vision to others. And this young woman who barely spoke 2 words her freshman year, her senior year, narrated a fashion show where her colleagues came down in these magnificent dresses that they had made and told everybody about them. Stood downstage left and just narrated this thing in front of a full drama studio of 200 people. This picture was taken a few weeks later at her capstone defense. There was not, again, and it's great because our kids grill the snot out of one another. They ask all these really hard questions, which is good, because in most capstone defenses, the adults were just like, this is beautiful, it's great. Like, we're all a wreck. And she's telling this story, and finally one of the kids said, all right, well, so you did this. Now what? And she said, well, I hope to keep LIB active, and I hope to keep making it something. I'm going to major in fashion. That is what I'm going to study in college, because what I want is to eventually make enough money that I can give back to SLA, because here is where I found my voice. What if we dared kids to do real work now? What if we didn't teach them, this is good for you someday? This matters now. And the cool coda to that story is that she actually, LIB is now just one line of a larger fashion company that she is doing while she's in college and selling it. I believe she uses Etsy to sell her work, which is amazing. The day's got to make more sense, too. Just out of curiosity, and this is something that all of you as school board members should do. How many of you, I'm curious, have ever tried in your work as school board members to follow a child through a day, especially of high school, I double dog dare each one of you to do that. And when you do, I don't want you to tell me the content of your first period class. I simply want you to be able to remember what class you had. We leverage the unbelievable energy of children to put them through something that none of us would do. The day's got to make more sense. We can use tools like essential questions and grade-wide themes and common core values and common rubrics to make every class a lens with which to view the world, as opposed to a silo of discrete information. And when we do that, we allow kids to see those connections and make those connections themselves. Because at the end, what we are doing is we're talking about metacognition. We want kids to understand the way that they think, the way that they learn. We want them to be fully realized as learners in the time that they spend with us. And what that leads to are schools that are understanding-driven and project-based. Now, I'm going to talk very briefly about project-based learning. A lot of people, it's a phrase that you hear in the space a lot, but I think it is a profoundly misunderstood phrase. Most schools look like this. They are recall-based. Most teachers give some kind of projects, right? But when they really want to know what a kid has learned, they give a test. And projects and homeworks and everything else are the stuff that they do along the way to keep the kids from falling asleep. The classes we need, the schools we need, are where the work of the kids' own head, heart, and hands, the things that they do and create and write and share, are the most valued, most valuable, powerful work of the class. And by the way, tests and quizzes might have a role in that. You can dipstick for discrete knowledge before you send them off to do the work. Sure, go for it. I've got one other thing when I talk about project-based learning. If you see a teacher who gives out a project and gets back 30 of the exact same thing, that was not project-based learning, that was recipe-based learning. Know the difference. I also believe that in most places, and this is what Will was talking about with this idea of have a vision, what we call that is the common language of teaching and learning. There is an ecosystem of teaching and learning at SLA because one of the things that I think that that we do that is a disservice to children is we make them figure out all the adults. How many of you would take this job? Imagine yourself as an adult. You're going for a job interview. It's a job you really want, and they offer you the job, and you say, oh, that's fantastic. Let's talk about, management. Let's talk about all this stuff. They say, great, well, this is what we want you to do. You're going to have 7 different bosses every day. None of them will speak the same language. All of them will value different things. And none of them will talk necessarily the same. They may use common terms, but they will use different things no matter who you report to. How many of you would take that job? But that's school. I was working with a school one time where I was talking to their 9th grade academy, and literally I had to navigate what was a reasonably hostile argument between the math teacher and the English teacher over whether or not when the kids formatted their paper, it should be name, subject, date, or name, date, subject. Say what? You need a common language. You need to speak the same language. At SLA, what does that look like? Everything we do starts with our 5 core values. Inquiry, what are the questions we can ask? Research, how do we find answers to those questions? Collaboration, how do we work together to make those answers deeper, better, richer? Presentation, how do we show what we know? And reflection, how do we step back and learn from what we have done? Then we all use Understanding by Design to write our unit plans. Is Understanding by Design the world's greatest unit planning tool? I don't know and I don't care. It's good enough. It's backwards design. It's smart thinking. But then what happens when we come together to talk about curriculum, we have a shared language. And then we also have a common rubric. Every single project that kids do is graded on the same rubric. What is the design of the project, the knowledge displayed, the application of that knowledge, the presentation of the project, and the process you followed. 5 categories. Each category is worth 20 points. Turns into 100, easily explained to parents. Common inputs, common process, common outputs. Add to that grade-wide essential themes and questions. Add to that standards-based grading that happens across disciplines and within disciplines. And there is a whole ecosystem of teaching and learning because every moment a child spends trying to figure out what the teacher is asking for is a moment they're not spending getting down to work, learning the work, and learning themselves. Lower the bar to understanding the adults by creating common tools and common frameworks and common ecosystems, and you raise the bar for kids to understand their work. Now, Will talks about technology in ways probably better than I do. But one of the things that I believe deeply about technology, as Neil Postman said it best, is certain technologies are not additive, they are transformative. He talked about the Gutenberg printing press, that when the Gutenberg printing press made its way through Europe, you didn't have the Europe you always had, plus some books, you had a wholly transformed Europe. The technology that we have today should enable us to not have the schools we've always had plus some cool tools. They should allow us to have completely changed schools. Anything less than that, and we're selling the kids and the promise of technology and the world short. So what do I think about technology? I think technology has got to be like oxygen. It's got to be ubiquitous, necessary, and invisible, right? It's got to be everywhere. It's got to be part of everything we do, and then we got to stop talking about it so much. You don't hear kids, like at SLA say, ooh, now we're going to do a technology project. They just say, we're getting to work. And to prove this point, when was the last time you heard a teacher send kids to the pencil lab? It's a tool. It's an unbelievably powerful, transformative tool. But it's a tool in service of it's got to be a tool in service of something greater. And sure, we can learn technology for technology's sake. I do it all the time. But that's not all we do. If we put it front and center, we'll never get to the next thing, which is that vision, that passion, that pedagogy of what does it look like. And to me, there's 4 things we look for. What do I hope that my school does? It is my profound hope that for the 4 years they spend with us, that SLA has helped them become more thoughtful, wise, passionate, and kind. And I don't mean thoughtful as a synonym for nice. I mean really full of thought. I want their heads to be exploding with ideas. I want them to have the wisdom to apply those ideas in powerful ways. I want them to have the passion to overcome the obstacles and challenges that they will face in service of those beautiful ideas. And I want them to be kind. Because, oh my God, does the world need more kindness. And I really do believe that if we do this, if that is our goal, what we're really trying to do is nothing short of changing the world. So how are we going to do it? First, be humbled by the task. And be skeptical of anybody who says that they've figured it out. All of these things have a dark side. All of this stuff is really hard. And I can tell you the flaws in every idea that I talked about up here, and will probably do so in my next session. But be humbled by the enormity of the task. We are trying to educate the kids. It's hard. Understand that inquiry is actually for all of us. We have to go back. I am hoping, if all of you aren't sitting there going, yeah, but what about? Throughout this keynote, then I haven't done my job. I haven't pushed you hard enough. We should ask hard questions, and we should never settle for easy answers, right? We also have to understand what leadership looks like. It's not top down. It's got to be grassroots. You got to get everybody on board, right? This is actually a picture from, we went to Harrisburg last year to protest the budget cuts. We took a couple of busloads of kids, and one of the buses broke down. A metaphor for Pennsylvania education, if there ever was one. And hey, one of the parents thought it was funny that one of the people pushing the bus to get it off the road was the principal. And I'm like, well, sometimes leadership is driving the bus, sometimes leadership is pushing the bus, whatever it takes. I said to you that I am the child of a union lawyer. I believe deeply in the idea that we need to organize. And I don't mean in our old ways. I mean new groups. I mean parents and teachers and school board members and students coming together to demand better. We need new organizations that speak to the world that we live in today. That doesn't mean the old ones don't work. It means that they need help. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? I also believe it's not enough to have flowery words. Every single thing I've talked to you about today, I can point you to systems and structures. We have to build healthy places. We have to build systems and structures that are in service of something, in service of a vision, in service of a belief of what school can be and what our society must be. I also think it's very funny. One of the things that we've learned over 9 years is there's kind of these 2 parallel tracks at SLA, right? One is that inquiry-based education, one is that ethic of care. And when we started the school, we kind of thought, well, one was the way we teach and learn, one is the way we talk about, we take care of the children. And they're kind of different, they're parallel tracks, but they're not really intertwined. And what we have learned in 9 years is how powerfully they are intertwined. And that an inquiry-driven education needs an ethic of care. And that there are some powerful questions that link the two. There are 3 questions, and I had this was actually in a workshop I was giving one time. I had an elementary school teacher raise their hand and say, Chris, I just know more than the kids. Where is my inquiry? And I said, you don't know what they're thinking. You don't know the kids. The kids are your inquiry project. So what are the 3 questions that all of us as adults can ask of each other and of the kids all of the time? What do you think? How do you feel? And what do you need? Imagine if in every school, those questions were asked every day. And imagine if we took action based on the answers we heard. What a transformative experience that would be for children. Now, the other question we ask all of the time at SLA is, what is the worst consequence of your best idea? Problematize everything. I've got a great idea. Let's let kids play with power tools. Nothing can go wrong, right? I will tell you another version of this, right? So the best thing about SLA is we have unbelievably empowered kids. The worst thing about SLA, we have unbelievably empowered kids. And we have to, and we saw that early on, because the problem is not just with kids, but with people. When you become empowered, there is a natural tendency to then get entitled and to start acting in some really jerky ways. And so we realized that this empowerment that we were preaching all of the time needed a healthy dose of community thought and communitarianism to make sure that my empowerment did not impinge upon yours. And so we changed the way that we talked about stuff, and we started really working to make sure that when we had these really good ideas, we asked ourselves not what will happen if this idea goes south, but let's assume the idea wins gloriously. Let's assume it works beautifully. What's the negative thing that will still happen, and how will we mitigate the bad thing that happens even when our ideas succeed? That's how you build healthy schools that don't regress to the mean. And please, I urge you, empower the kids. I said this when I was in Will's session earlier today. It is my belief that every school board in America should have student representation on it. Now, you can start with non-voting. That's fine. I personally think they should have they should be allowed to vote. But imagine what would happen if every single one of your school boards, tomorrow went back and said, we will have student representation. And we will make sure that student voice, when we come together to talk about how we spend the money, what we will build, what we will do, how we will negotiate with our teachers. If you had a student speaking as well. Not just as a speaker, but actually as a full member of that body. How would that change what you did? Because it is their education, and it's going to be their world very soon. I also believe everything you do has got to be in service of your beautiful vision. The way you hire, the way you do lunch, the way the buses line up, everything. You cannot want one thing for kids and want something different for the teachers, for the secretaries, for the bus attendants. You have to be one school. And you have to take this back. The idea that I could come here and talk to a group of school board members is amazing. And I am so thankful that you had me here. But please, if anything that you heard from me, from Will, from Shannon later on resonates, have the conversation in your community. Those questions you are asking right now of yourself, how would we do this? What might this look like? What is the problem with this? What would happen if you said at your next school board meeting, you know what we're doing? We're buying pizza. And we're going to come together to talk about these ideas. And instead of talking about how we're going to pass the Common Core and yada, 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 you started with this question. What do we want for our children? And how can our schools get us there? What would that change the lens with which you viewed everything you did? And I urge you, have fun. Get yourselves into schools. Make schools joyful places, right? I mean, and I say this to teachers all of the time. Teachers are the luckiest people in the world. We get to teach. Like, I spend my day around 500 amazing people. Like, it's the best thing in the world. I don't understand anybody who doesn't love that. I mean, I could be an accountant. Ugh. I'm probably just really upset the accountant's in the room. I am so sorry. But seriously, and then the other piece of all of this is that all of us who work in education, there is so much language about how schools should be transformative for children, and so little talk about how schools must be transformative for the adults as well. It is the ultimate act of hubris to think that you can change the life of a child without being changed yourself. The hardest thing about my job is trying to be Mr. Lehmann, trying to be the adult these kids need me to be, believe me to be. No one's that good. No one's that wise. But I'm a lot better for the effort of 20 years of trying to be that person. Be willing to be transformed, because at the end of the day, what are we teaching in an era where kids have more access to information in their pockets than we can possibly have in our own heads. We are teaching the thing that great schools and great teachers have taught for generations and generations. We teach wisdom. Thank you very much.